Good morning. Welcome to the September series of the Ojai Video Conference educational program. Today's program is brought to you by the Oklahoma Healthy Aging Initiative, or Ojai, as I just referenced, as it's more commonly known. We are funded by the Donald W. Reynolds Foundation and operate within the Department of Geriatric Medicine at the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center. We are a statewide organization devoted to the health of older adults. We teach health classes for older adults and their caregivers, provide family and professional caregiver training, partner with health systems across the state to provide specialized geriatric care, and work with leaders to promote the interests of older adults. Please join me in welcoming our guest of honor, Jeanene Lindsey. Jeanene Lindsey is the Executive Director at Fountain Brook Assisted Living and Memory Care. Jeanene is a long-term care administrator who has spent most of her career dedicated to educating healthcare professionals on the ethical issues and dilemmas most commonly found in long-term care. I'll now turn it over to Jeanene.
Well, good morning, and thank you for having me today. I'm going to talk today about just some of the basics of Alzheimer's and caregiver resources. Being a caregiver myself of someone that has Alzheimer's disease, I have the professional knowledge that I need to take care of them, but it was being a caregiver that really gave me a different perspective. And hopefully today I'll give you some of the knowledge that you need, but I'm also going to give you some of the things that I learned as a caregiver myself. And this presentation is kind of from the caregiver's perspective, and I hope that you find it helpful. Push the wrong button.
There you go.
Oh, sorry. Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
First, I wanted to kind of identify just how many of us caregivers there are in Oklahoma. Right now, there's almost 114,000 caregivers in the state of Oklahoma. And right now, we provide over 97 million hours of caregiving annually. That caregiving oftentimes has some type of impact on our economy. And in Oklahoma, unpaid caregiving is approximately $106 billion a year. So if they had to pay caregivers to do what we do every day, that's the equivalent of $106 billion. Now, the cost of caregiving on the actual economy is estimated at somewhere around $157 million annually. That's the cost of us having to miss some days of work, loss in productivity, things along those lines. So caregiving really does have a huge impact on not just you as a caregiver in your personal life, but it also has a big impact on your community. We're going to talk a little bit about what, what Alzheimer's disease actually is. And it's a type of dementia that causes problems with a person's memory, their thinking, and their behavior. And some of the symptoms develop very slowly over time, and then eventually they develop to the point where the person passes. Now, what can you expect once you receive the diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease? And what can you do as a caregiver to help your family member? Since Alzheimer's disease is not reversible, it's progressive, and it slowly destroys the memory and affects the cognition of the person that you're caring for, you may see things like memory loss early on, changes in their mood, misplacing things. I know with my godmother, the things that we started noticing right off the bat were the fact that she was getting lost while she was driving and calling in a panic because she didn't know where she was at and didn't understand or couldn't remember how to get home. And that was very traumatizing to us as a family because we had to find a way to figure out what it was we were seeing. Was this maybe Alzheimer's disease, or could it have been the fact that she, was taking some new medications and there was some side effects, confusion and disorientation from that? So these are just some of the signs that you may notice early on with your loved one, but these are typically the top 9 symptoms you'll see in the early stages of somebody that is developing Alzheimer's disease. Now, this is the one thing that I didn't see a lot of healthcare professionals talking to my family about, and it's what can I, as the caregiver, expect to change? And there's going to be a lot of changes for you as a caregiver once you receive the diagnosis. The biggest one that you can expect is that your daily routine is going to change. And then you're also going to have a change in your role in the relationship that you have with the person that you're caregiving for. If you're a mother and a daughter, you're going to switch roles. If you're a husband and wife, you're going to switch roles. If you are an extended family member and you've stepped in to caregive for somebody else in your family, you're now going to be somebody in their immediate family. And there's also big changes in how people communicate once they start developing some of the more profound symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. So you're going to become very well versed in nonverbal communication and a whole lot of different approaches in how you care for the person that has dementia. And then you're going to learn the importance of asking for help, asking for resources. I think caregivers a lot of times take on more than they should because they don't understand the resources that are available to them. And hopefully after today you'll understand a little bit more about the resources that we have in Oklahoma, the advocacy and research resources we have nationally, and then the resources that we have globally through the internet. So, go back. Okay. So this is from the perspective of the person living with dementia. In the early stages, the person is going to have some things that you'll notice as a caregiver. They're going to probably be confused when they're dressing, so they may not understand how to match their clothes. They also may not understand how long they've been wearing their clothes. If you're a caregiver and you're only going over, let's say every other day to do things for them in their own home, and you notice every time you're there they're wearing the same outfit, they probably are wearing the same outfit every day, but they don't understand that about themselves. They also will forget how to operate just normal everyday household appliances. They won't understand how to operate a washing machine or a dryer. They probably will have problems with operating the shower, figuring out how to get the temperature just right. And then the big one is that a lot of times they forget that they've had a meal. And they either won't eat because they can't remember when's the last time I had a meal, or they overeat because they forgot they have eaten. So some of the things that you really want to look for is when you go over there to care for them, if you notice that they're wearing the same clothes, that things around the house aren't getting cleaned or taken care of the way that they used to do, maybe they started gaining weight or losing weight. Those could all be early stage symptoms. Now, in the middle stages, a caregiver may notice that it's taking them longer to get dressed, even with the clothes that you lay out on the bed for them, because you already understand they're too confused to pick out their own clothing, and you lay it out on the bed for them. You notice it's taking them longer to get dressed, and that's because they're struggling with a couple of different things. The first thing is they're struggling with probably manipulating the clothing and getting it on over their heads. They get confused by their activities of daily living, and dressing, bathing, toileting, personal care, those are all things that are activities of daily living. So you may most likely notice that the smells, because you understand they're not bathing the way they should. They're not taking care of their personal hygiene. Perhaps you've noticed that, they're not brushing their teeth. They may not be showering. They may not be taking care of their personal care well enough to keep odors from coming up that you may notice when you're visiting with them and taking care of them. You'll also notice too, at this point, usually they forget how to use kitchen equipment. So you may come over and they forgot to turn off the stove. And that pot of water that was boiling is now dry and there's smoke in the house. Or you come over and they've left the refrigerator door open all night long and everything in there's spoiled, everything you just went and bought them. Another thing is that you may come in and notice that they're walking around and they're very careful about how they're walking around their space. And that's because they're afraid of falling. They don't want to fall. They know that their balance isn't as good as it used to be. And the first thing they want to do is hold on to something so they're secure. When you're walking around with them in public, they hold on to you if they have never done that before because they're afraid of falling. And then this is probably one of the ones that I think caregivers probably struggle with the most, because we know what we're doing. We love them. We want to take care of them. We want to do the honorable thing by them because they would do it for us. But we need to understand that when we start helping them with things like personal care, toileting and bathing and dressing, they're going to feel embarrassed. They're going to feel humiliated because they've been independent with that their whole lives. And now those role reversals have occurred, and we're trying to take care of them in a way that we know we can do, but we have to be willing to allow them to sort of adjust to it. So it can be really hard for somebody living with dementia to accept that loss of independence. And they're aware of it. That's why they feel embarrassed or may feel humiliated. And as long as we understand their perspective, our approach can be adjusted so that they understand that we love them and we do this for them because we want to honor them. In the late stages, a lot of times this is the stage where they become nonverbal. The time you spend with them really needs to focus on being with them. And in that I meant you're with them and you're taking care of them, but make sure you stop long enough to sit with them and hold their hand, to talk to them, just being with them. They may not be able to verbalize what it is that their needs are, but it's amazing how much you can understand just by nonverbal communication. You know, you come into the room and maybe they're anxious, fidgety, you know, somebody wants them to sit in a chair and not move, but they want to get up and move around. And one of the things that worked with my family member was when she would get that way, I would sit down with her and hold her hand, and I would sing gospel music to her, or I would read just straight out of the Bible to her. And after about 15 or 20 minutes of that, her mood went from being anxious and fidgety to being calm, and then she was able to sort of calm down enough that she fell asleep. But if I had come in and tried to do what I've seen some caregivers do, which is, you know, sit down, stop getting up, look, I can't do this if you're doing that. You've got to go where they are. You, as a caregiver, cannot bring them into your world. You've got to go to their world. You've got to find something that will allow you to be in the world with them. And you know what that is because you know this person you're caregiving for. It's going to look different for every person. But for my family member, I knew how important her spirituality and her faith was to her. And I knew that those things always brought her great comfort when she was having struggles or trials and tribulations in her personal life. I knew that's where she always turned for comfort. And I just tried it one day. I didn't know if it was going to work or not, but I wasn't afraid to try. And as a caregiver, middle and late stage, you're going to try a whole lot of things. You're going to try a whole lot of different approaches to communication. You just have to stop and think about what it is you know about that individual and try some different things until you find something that'll work. And then you have to do it again because what once worked won't work forever. Somebody in the late stages is probably also going to be at the point where they're not going to be recognizing you. So I hope that you understand that and you don't ask them to recall, oh, you remember who I am? Sure, Mom, it's your daughter. But she doesn't remember that, and you just need to understand that. They also, at this point in the late stages, they become more dependent on us for almost everything that they need. And they may still be able to participate in some of their personal care, but it's really our responsibility to make sure that we understand what we need to be doing for them. Now, some of the things that are common among all the different stages of Alzheimer's disease is that Alzheimer's disease affects every single one of our senses. It affects our eyesight, our hearing, our smell, our taste, the touch, how we respond to all of those stimuli. Alzheimer's disease affects every single one of our senses. So you may notice that somebody that's living with dementia is going to be more susceptible to viruses because their immune system's compromised. They also may experience a decrease in their ability to hear. Their eyesight might change. They'll start having more balance problems. Their gait, the way they walk will change. They may present where they're walking with their head down versus up. So you just need to be mindful of those things. And then their body's thermostat is completely out of whack. You will walk into a room and it's warm. And they're in there wearing a parka with a blanket on top of it because they're cold. So remember to adjust the temperature for their comfort and not yours. Now we're going to talk a little bit about, okay, so we're in the early stages of caregiving, and what does that mean? Well, you don't know. You're uncertain. you're scared. You also might be in a little bit of denial because this person just 2 months ago might have been working full-time or been a full-time volunteer, and then you're frustrated because now your whole life's going to change. And then you may get a little angry, maybe a little resentful, because now you realize that the plans you had for yourself and your own family are going to change, because now you've got this extra responsibility. And then you're not going to know what to do, because you're going to have a lot of information coming at you really quick. You get the diagnosis, all of a sudden you're going to turn into a research wizard. You're going to look for and try to read and find everything you can so you can understand what it is you can expect. That information is not hard to find, but it doesn't often come from the caregiver's perspective. They tell you what to expect if you're the person living with it. So when you're doing your research and you're looking for that sort of information, look for things from the perspective that you're going to be using, your own. And then the grief and the sadness. The grief, once you get that diagnosis in your family, is real. It hurts. It makes you sad. And it's really difficult to reconcile that. I am getting a little emotional, but I lost my family member on August 29th of this year to Alzheimer's disease. So this is something that I'm very familiar with. In the middle stages, all that grief and the frustration and the uncertainty and the anger and all of that stuff is still there. But now we're adding on to it the fact that you feel helpless, that you feel overwhelmed. Even as a healthcare professional myself, everything that I have learned throughout my career, and I have my master's in gerontology and mental health and aging, so I'm well educated, but that didn't prepare me for taking on the real role of a caregiver. I felt overwhelmed, exhausted. I was afraid of what was in front of us. I was resistant to help because I wanted to be in control. I wanted to try to make sure that things were going to go a certain way. Well, you know what? With Alzheimer's disease, throw that out the window, because you're not in control. It is. And you just have to remember that. You're going to feel isolated at times, and I experienced the isolation more so because of the change in the role. Whenever my family member and I had to change roles, I grieved for the relationship that we had before we got the diagnosis. I didn't have that person that I could talk to and get advice from and reminisce with, because they were no longer able to cognitively do that with me. And so that made me feel more isolated, because I could see I was losing that relationship and it had changed. And then you're going to have conflicting responsibilities. You're going to have the caregiving, you're going to have your own family life, you're going to have your career, and then you're going to have your social life. And you somehow, some way, got to prioritize it and juggle it day to day. And I tell you, my life was a hot mess when I was trying to juggle everything. I have no idea how I managed to do it. And what got me through was the fact that I knew they'd do it for me. They would sacrifice for me. They would give anything they needed to do to make sure I was taken care of. And that love and commitment is what's going to keep you going. In the late stages, you still have the grief, the helplessness, the uncertainty, the denial, the exhaustion. But now your grief really isn't as recognizable because you've sort of settled into knowing that you're saying this, what they call the long goodbye. And then you start having to worry about those end-of-life decisions. And in all honesty, I would strongly suggest as soon as you get the diagnosis in your family, you start having those end-of-life discussions so that you are including the person living with in that conversation. If you wait to think about that until the late stages, it's really and truly probably not going to include their voice. It's going to be you making choices that you think they want you to make. So I encourage you to do that early. And what's going to happen after they die? And how can I make their last few months comfortable? How do I say goodbye? And you're going to have some confusing thoughts about their coming death because you want them to be at peace, but you don't want them to leave you. So you're going to be jumping back and forth the entire time. And you just have to know that that's part of the process of grief. It's okay. That's normal. And the hardest part for you is probably going to be figuring out how to say that goodbye. How do you make that meaningful for you? And how can you be with the person that you're caregiving for so that they know you're there? You know, all of those things, if you focus on how you want to say goodbye, like my family did, it makes all the difference in the world because then you feel more at peace. So, some of the benefits of encouraging them to participate in personal care. This is going back to things that you'll see that you probably will have to do in most likely the longest stage of Alzheimer's disease, right in the middle. And if you look at, well, how can you help them maintain as much of their independence as possible? Well, it's real simple. If you want them to maintain their physical capabilities, you want to make sure that they're doing those things as much as possible for themselves because it helps them maintain their strength. It helps them maintain their range of motion. It helps them maintain their balance and their coordination. And then their body awareness. Now those are all really important when you're talking about personal care, but those also will help you help them whenever they're doing other things such as feeding themselves. And then if you encourage them to be independent, it also gives them some sense of control over their own body and their own life. It also helps improve their self-esteem because they've got some of that independence they can hold on to. And then it helps them feel competent, and then it also helps them feel more satisfied knowing that they're continuing to take care of themselves in some of those real important private sort of ways. And then if you encourage them to participate in personal care cognitively, that actually helps them maintain their procedural memory. Like the picture here, the wife is basically modeling the behavior she wants her husband to do. That's procedural memory. And then it also helps keep them orientated to person, which is themselves. And then it improves their functional abilities. So some of the basic techniques that seemed to work well for me was that I had to focus on what abilities my family member still had. And that's going to look different depending on the person. I also had to learn how to be a lot more flexible with the time it took to perform personal care. I actually had to catch myself one day because I left work and I was on my way over to their home, and I'm thinking in my head, okay, I just need to go over there, I need to get this, and this done. And then I had to stop myself. I was like, wait a minute. I'm not a caretaker. I'm not trying to take care of them. I'm a caregiver. I need to give of myself. And I need to be there with them and encourage them to do these things for themselves versus me trying to get in there and do it for them because I'm faster. I've got places to go. I've got stuff I've got to do when I'm done here. So when you look at this picture and you see some of the things that the wife is doing to help the husband do that personal care independently, it is taking her more time to do those things, but it's more meaningful for him and it's better for him as he progresses. Another important part of being a caregiver is making sure that they are getting enough nutrients, they're staying well hydrated. Some of the best things that I found that work really well is, limiting your distractions, making sure that you keep things simple on the table, that you are flexible with food preferences, because remember, their sense of taste and their sense of smell are impaired. So you may be playing to just their visual sense. You may have to model behavior for them. Picking up the spoon and saying, look at me, it's time to eat. Some of those things. Nutrition and hydration are really, really important for the person that you're caregiving for, but it's equally as important for you. So I used to eat with them, and that way it was homier and more personable. And if I was going to be modeling it, it was much better for me to really be doing it in the first place, at least for my family member. And then typically if you take time to model it, you sort of simplify the process. You don't have as much on the table. You've got just 2 or 3 things on their plate, and the environment's calm and maybe quiet. You can actually reduce the agitation that they may be feeling at a mealtime. And I see this at my assisted living as well. Mealtimes are usually pretty calm. We usually don't have any issues with behaviors during mealtime because they're in the routine and they see other people doing it, so they sort of understand that. Now, how do you encourage independence at mealtime? The best advice I could give you is adapt the place setting. Meaning, get brighter dishes, don't serve white rice on a white plate. Use adaptive devices if they're having issues with their grip. Again, use the watch me technique, and then don't worry about neatness. It's not going to be neat. You're going to need to invest in some of those lap bibs, which are big and they go all the way down to here, and that'll help keep them somewhat clean. But in the middle and late stages of Alzheimer's disease, their eating is not, it's messy. So just be prepared for that. Most important thing is, are they feeding themselves? If they're feeding themselves and you found something that they are eating, just let them eat it. Some other tips: don't prepare foods that are too hard for them to chew. And then if they are prone to choking or aspirating, you might need to address that with your physician, because at some point in time they may need to have thickened liquids or a chopped or pureed diet in order to keep them from aspirating on their food. And then if you see a decrease in their appetite, ask your doctor, hey, can I supplement with Ensure or provide them with snacks more frequently throughout the day. The most important piece of this is that we just need to be mindful of how much they're eating and making sure that we're trying to get them to eat enough nutrients and enough calories that they can sustain their energy. Safety in the home environment, it's all about preventing falls. Grab bars in the bathroom, in the bathing area as well as in the toileting area are always good. You may need to even adapt the environment. Let's say you have stairs in the home. Well, you know what? They may not be able to do stairs. You may have to move their bed down to the front room. You may have to forego having a private dining room because that's the space they now need to live in. So just be prepared to adapt to the environment in any way you need to keep them safe. And then to minimize some of the dangers, you may want to look at your security system. Can you install cameras so that you can check on them when you're not around using your smartphone or online? Or is there technology you can use in the home that will help alert you if they're opening a door or forgetting to take a medication? There's all kinds of things you can do depending on